Sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel isn't hope. Sometimes it's a train. 7 years ago this week, I'd been through some stuff, and life finally seemed like it might be turning a corner. My son Clayton had put an appointment on my calendar. It said only 2 words: new beginning. And at the time, it made perfect sense. In a family built around radio, television, and entertainment, Clayton was the black sheep. He went into medicine. After Ole Miss, he had stepped away from his dream of becoming a doctor and accepted a position as a surgical tech at Baylor Hospital in downtown Dallas. But 9 years later, he was ready to begin again, new beginning. He wanted me to go with him to Texas A&M as he enrolled to continue the journey toward becoming a doctor. Ever the optimistic realist who could rain on any parade, I said in my best motherly way, "Wow, Clayton, that's great, but do you realize that's going to take like years and years?" Well, the next thing he said put me in my place. "Well, Mom, think of it this way. When I'm your age, I'll be a doctor." If we've never met, I'm Susan Price Thompson. I'm the founder of I Can See You, and I help people move from chaos to clarity through biblical wisdom, discernment, and learning to recognize how God is already at work in their lives. And you know, I've discovered something over the years. Transformation doesn't usually begin when our circumstances change. It begins when the implanted Word of God gradually changes the way we see. And when the way we see begins to change, everything else begins to change. So, remember that train I told you about? The train came. 4 days later, after a sudden brain aneurysm, we took Clayton off life support. The new beginning he had written in my calendar wasn't wrong. The beginning just wasn't the one I expected. A mother isn't supposed to bury her child. I mean, that's what people say when they don't know what else to say, but I didn't bury a child. I buried Clayton. I buried laughter. I buried birthdays that will never come. I buried the sound of his voice, the smell of his skin, the weight of his future. Every morning driving him to school, back in the old days, I'd talk and sing the whole way, and Clayton would deadpan from the back seat, "Mom, try not to speak." I ignored him then, and I'm ignoring him now. At Clayton's memorial service, I began with those same 2 words, new beginnings, just not the beginning I expected. Only later did I realize it wasn't just true of Clayton, it was true of me. And if you've lived very long, it's probably true of you too. Maybe the marriage you expected never happened. Maybe the marriage you expected did happen and then it ended. Maybe the career ended. Maybe the diagnosis came. Maybe the dream changed. Maybe the prayer was unanswered, or maybe the prayer was answered, just not the way you expected. We think we're walking toward one beginning, only later do we discover God was leading us into another. I love the book of James because it's short and sweet and strong. The older I get, the more I realize James isn't just giving us a checklist. He's describing a transformation. He begins by saying our faith is forced into the open when life becomes difficult. Then he tells us to boldly ask for wisdom. "Hey God, my life is broken, help me." And then James says something extraordinary. Receive the implanted word. Implanted, not merely read or studied, something lived, something that quietly takes root beneath the surface and begins changing the way we see everything. I've come to believe that implanted word gradually transforms us until we begin seeing life, especially the darkest chapters of our lives, more and more as God sees them. Not all at once, little by little, deep calling to deep. The Apostle Paul writes, "For now we see through a glass darkly." It doesn't say we see nothing. It says we don't yet see everything. We don't yet see the whole story. Here's something that struck me recently. Even though when we stand in front of a mirror, we don't see all of ourselves. We just catch a glimpse. How much more is that true of life? We see one chapter maybe. God sees the whole story. James reminds us of the same thing. So does Paul. God is inviting me to keep walking until one day I see him face to face. Clayton's death was not good. It never will be, but God has never stopped bringing life out of what tried to destroy mine. People often say, everything happens for a reason. I've never been able to say that, but what I can say is this: God has never wasted anything in my life. Not one tear, not one disappointment, not one unanswered prayer, not even the darkest day of my life. He didn't call it good, but he brought good from it. and those are two very different things. Oh, for years I thought surviving was the goal, and it was, but now I know transformation is the goal. My life testifies. Illness became transformation, from surviving to living. Marriage betrayal became transformation, from hopelessness to healing. Grief became transformation, from devastation to deeper sight. Not because those experiences were good, I surely never would wish them on anyone, but because God met me there. The implanted word kept growing slowly, almost imperceptibly. I found myself seeing differently. I stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And I began asking, God, what are you showing me that I can't yet see? Not predicting the future, having all the answers, how to make it from one moment to the next by recognizing God while my story is unfolding. Maybe that's where you are today, standing at a threshold and not even realizing it yet. The strange thing about thresholds is that they rarely look like new beginnings while you're standing in them. Most of the time they look like endings or dead ends or quicksand even. Yeah, I couldn't see it either. I thought I knew exactly what new beginning meant. I was reading two words. God was reading the whole story. Psalm 139 says that all our days were known to him before one of them came to be. I wonder what's written on your calendar today. Maybe it doesn't literally say new beginning. Maybe it says cancer, divorce, bankruptcy, widow, addiction, alone. Or maybe it just says Tuesday, an ordinary day that doesn't look important at all. But what if one day you look back and realize you were standing at a threshold? What if this chapter you've been calling an ending is the beginning? Maybe not the beginning you expected, but the beginning that God already sees. Maybe that's because God has always been better at reading our calendars than we are. Before we finish, if these conversations are helping you see your life a little more clearly, do me a favor. Click subscribe and then click the little bell and choose all notifications. I'm building this community one conversation at a time, and I'd really love for you to continue the journey with me because we're just getting started. That's why this ministry is called I Can See You. Not because I'm special, not because I've figured it out, but because I've spent years allowing the Word of God to transform my own sight first. And the more clearly I began to see what God was doing, the more clearly I began seeing what He was doing in other people. My prayer isn't simply that you'll have a reservation in heaven someday, although that's nice. My prayer is that the implanted Word will continue transforming you until you begin seeing yourself, seeing others, and even seeing your hardest chapters more and more as God sees them. Because that's when chaos begins giving way to clarity, and clarity begins giving way to transformation, one new beginning at a time. Oh, and one more thing. I really do wish you could see what God sees when He looks at you. But until you do, I can see you. And I'll see you next time.